Chris, we're going to start in baseball, where a select few were hoping to get a call from Cooperstown on Tuesday night. Well, Adrian Beltre, Todd Helton, and Joe Mauer have been elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Beltre was a four-time All-Star who split his career between the Dodgers, Mariners, Red Sox, and Rangers. He won 5 Gold Glove awards and was a 4-time Silver Slugger. Joe Mauer, meanwhile, spent his entire 15-year career with the Twins and was named American League MVP in 2009. And Todd Helton finally gets in after hitting nearly 75% on last year's ballot. He played his entire 17-year career with the Colorado Rockies. And here's a look at the vote percentages. Adrian Beltre, in his first year of eligibility, receiving just over 95% of the votes. Fellow first ballot Hall of Famer Joe Mauer receiving just over 76%, and Todd Helton over 79%. Bill Wagner falling just short at 73%, and Gary Sheffield doesn't get in on his last year on the ballot, receiving just under 64% of the votes. And we are now joined by CBS Sports MLB insider and analyst Jim Bowden. The name on that last graphic that I know Jim isn't too thrilled about is Andrew Jones, missing the mark, just over 61% of the votes. Jim, not yet. We're going to talk about that in a moment, okay? But how about the names who did land their name amongst baseball's greats? It comes as zero surprise, I think, to any of us that Adrian Beltre is in Cooperstown. He's Cooperstown bound on his first year on the ballot. Put his Hall of Fame resume into perspective for us.
Yeah, we're talking about one of the greatest third basemen that ever played. Certainly was the best of his era. And to think that he had a career WAR of 93.5 is just amazing numbers. I mean, 477 home runs. He finished in the top 10 in MVP voting 6 different times, which is incredible. Drove in over 1,700 runs in his career with the 5 Gold Gloves, the 4 Silver Sluggers. He also brought great leadership skills and a great sense of humor too. I mean, I love when he gets down on one knee and hit the home runs. That was really fun. I love the time that he was on deck and he was swinging a bat and the umpire said, you can't be this far down, go back where the on-deck circle was. So he went and got the on-deck circle and dragged it back to where he was standing and got ejected from the game. I love how much fun he used to have with his teammates. As long as you didn't rub his head, he was always keeping his team loose. But I think what really separates him and stands out to me defensively was his body control play on the ball in front of him, his first step quickness, special, and his range in 360 degrees was as good as any third baseman that ever played the game, and that to me really separates. And from a contractual basis, I think what stands out is he was the player who really was the first one to sign a quote-unquote pillow contract. His agent, Scott Boras, signing him with a 1-year deal in Boston so that he could prove what he could do, because he couldn't get the long-term contract he was looking for. He went to Boston on the pillow deal, had a great year, and then ended up getting that long-term deal with the Rangers where he would finish his career.
Hey, Jim, Joe Mauer, another name hitting the ballot for the first time. Based on public polling, we knew he had a chance. He ends up getting in with 76% of the vote. Did Mauer's resume warrant a first ballot entry in your eyes?
Look, to me, no. Okay, the first ballot catchers for me are Johnny Bench and Pudge Rodriguez, and I thought the next first ballot catcher Hall of Famer would be Yadier Molina, and when it's his time, I think he'll get in on the first ballot. But I think what Joe Mauer and Todd Helton, who we'll get to in a minute, for them getting in, it sends a strong message on how the writers put a lot of emphasis on makeup and character, integrity, how they carried themselves off the field. I think that played a big role. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Joe Mauer. I think he's a Hall of Fame catcher, but a borderline Hall of Fame catcher. I would have voted him in, but I don't think he's a first ballot catcher. He did have a 55 WAR in his career. I mean, the 9 years that he caught from 2004 to 2013, he was the best catcher. He did win 3 Gold Gloves, 5 Silver Sluggers, was an All-Star 6 times. But the one thing that bothered me about his career is he only hit more than 14 home runs one time. never drove in 100 runs, never drove in 100 RBIs, and from 2013 to 18 played first base and just didn't put up those kind of numbers. But he could flat out hit. He was a career 388 on base percentage player. And so, you know, the bat and the fact that he caught the 9 years that he did gets him in. But I will say this, I think Mauer getting in, and as well as Todd Helton, who we'll talk about in a minute, I think it waters down the Hall of Fame a little bit. I think we're expanding it a little bit. We're not just putting in the very, very, very best that ever played the game. The pool is getting a little bit bigger is what I'm noticing.
Okay, the name that you did bring up, Todd Helton, he rounds out the class of 2024. Five-time All-Star, four-time Silver Slugger, gets the nod on his 6th year on the ballot. Jim, when we spoke on Monday, Helton isn't a name you expected to be headed to Cooperstown this time around. Why do you think voters ultimately pushed him over the top?
Yeah, look, I think for the first 5 years, I think we all looked at Todd Helton, including myself, and it's the splits away from Coors Field that bother us. His numbers on the road, he had an 80 OPS plus on the road. That's below average. And so, you know, how much do you factor in Coors Field? But that being said, when you take a deep breath, you know, career 414 on base, career 539 slug, that's incredible. 369 homers, 5 All-Star, 4 Silver Slugger. You know, we look at the whole pool. But here's the other thing. He played all 17 years in Colorado. He was the greatest Rocky to ever play. And again, like Joe Mauer, face of the franchise in Colorado. Great makeup, great character, and popularity is playing into some of these votes. And so when you see players the caliber of Mauer and Helton, who are both borderline Hall of Famers for me, okay? But what puts them over the top? Leadership, makeup, character, intangibles, which is all part of the criteria. And I think when we look at all the great players that aren't getting in, you know, Bonds and Clemens didn't get in. Manny Ramirez, A-Rod, Gary Sheffield didn't get in this year. A lot of players, Sammy Sosa, a lot of players that were tied to PEDs, none of them are getting in. So if you were suspended from the sport, or you were in the Balco report or the Mitchell report, you're not getting in. And I think, you know, character, integrity is something that Mauer and Helton, they're about. I mean, they represented their cities as good as any player has in baseball. And both of those guys spending their careers with one team, you know, like Tony Gwynn, like George Brett, like Barry Larkin. And when you're a face of a franchise like that, I think it helps push you over the top. So congrats to both of them. I mean, both of them barely got in. That's the truth of it. But they needed 75%, and they got it, Kiana.
Let's talk about some of those names that you just mentioned, names that didn't get in. Gary Sheffield was in his 10th and final year on the ballot. He received 64% of the vote, up from 55% from last year, but it's still not enough despite all of his accolades. Two other names, you even mentioned some, and they're names that are linked to and dragged down by the steroid era. Manny Ramirez, you mentioned that. Alex Rodriguez, also a far cry from the 75% needed to be enshrined. Jim, what do you make of baseball's writers' view of Sheffield and these other would-be Hall of Famers that we talked about?
Yeah, so I'll start with Rodriguez and Ramirez because you mentioned them, but both of them were suspended from the sport for using PEDs, and there was evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. So I'm going to separate those two from this conversation. I'm going to specifically talk about Gary Sheffield, who I would have voted in if I had a vote this year. I watched his career, and his bat speed alone should have gotten him in the Hall of Fame. He had the best bat speed I've ever seen in my entire life. 509 home runs. That should get you in the Hall of Fame. 1,676 RBIs should get you in the Hall of Fame. A 393 on base and a 140 OPS plus gets you in the Hall of Fame. So why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? Well, he was mentioned in the Balco report. He was mentioned in the Mitchell report, although he was mentioned as a witness rather than a victim. And so, you know, the voters looked at it differently. I mean, he got close, but unfortunately, he had a little cloud around him, and people really don't know what the truth of the facts are and probably never will, but the voters decided after 10 years not to put him in. For them not to put him in, Kiana, tells you it was nothing to do with his performance on the field, because what he did on the field should have gotten him in the Hall of Fame. It's questions they had around him. Now, I do think in time that the Veterans Committee eventually down the road, I think there'll be a pathway, and I think he'll eventually get in because he should get in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. You named a list of his accolades and what he's been able to do and he's done throughout his career, and it's a shame that, due to the things that, might not be public knowledge, will keep him amongst being a part of baseball's greats out in Cooperstown. But I think what we do have is the memory of what he did during his career, along with some others right there. Jim, we appreciate the insight as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiana.
And here's a look at some of the notable eligible players for the 2025 Hall of Fame. Ichiro Suzuki, we have CC Sabathia, another one, Yankees legend right there. A few names, Brian McCann, Adam Jones, Felix Hernandez. A lot of really great names that will be first-year eligible players. Not sure if we'll see another first ballot like we have seen in year 2024. That's number 59 and number 60 of first ballot Hall of Famers added to the list, but some great names with some great baseball history that become eligible this time next year.